DreAllDay.com.
Dre Baldwin, DreAllDay.com, BallOverseas.com. This video, I'm going to answer the question, how good are overseas basketball players? Now, I know that many people have attempted to answer this question, or some people think they have answered this question. I'm going to answer here in a way that you probably haven't heard, and if you are not familiar with me, then I know you haven't heard. If you are familiar with me, then you might understand. First of all, let me give you some context before I even give this answer. I've seen people try to answer this question by saying, well, overseas basketball is like, it's like this level of college basketball, or if you played at this level, or you could play against people who played here, then that means you could play overseas. But you can't answer the question in that way. I'm going to explain to you why I can't answer this question by saying overseas basketball players are this skill level, or they're this, or if the NBA is this, then everybody overseas is this, or they're here to here. It doesn't work like that, and you can't put the answer in this neat little box in that way, because sometimes in life, whether we talking basketball or not, there's some aspects of life that you can't just paraphrase it down to, oh, well, it's this, and that's just what it is, and just so the simple-minded individuals can understand it. Some things in life require a little bit more context, a little bit more understanding, and it takes a little bit more depth of explanation from somebody like myself, and a little bit more depth of understanding from people like you to really get what this is. So the first thing you need to understand is that unlike the NBA, which has 30 teams, and the G League, which has another 30, I think they got 30 teams now, or they're going to. You're looking at in the NBA, less than 1,000 players total. So there's the variance between players is not that big, because not that many of them. And the NBA is the NBA. It's always been the NBA. The G League is the G League. It's always been pretty much as it is. It hasn't been around that long. Overseas basketball is a lot different simply because there are more teams, a lot more teams. There are a lot more players. When it comes to professional basketball players, American-born players playing overseas, as of spring 2020, there are just over 4,000 players playing overseas. 4,000. So in the NBA, you got 450 in the NBA, 300 from the G League, that's 750. You have 4,000, that's 6 times the number of players who are Americans playing overseas basketball somewhere in the world. When I say overseas, I'm talking that includes Mexico, Canada, South America, outside of the United States. So when I say overseas, I mean outside of USA, professionally and getting paid. Now, at the same time that there are all these players, 6 times more players than outside the NBA, most of them, we don't know who they are. Right? I can't name every player who's playing overseas. If you show me a bunch of pictures, a slideshow of a bunch of players who play in the NBA, I could probably name damn near all of them, right? And you probably can too if you watch basketball. If I showed you the same slideshow, a bunch of dudes who play overseas, you might not be able to name any of them, because we don't watch overseas basketball. Even myself, we don't watch overseas games the same way we watch NBA games. So unless you're a person who could say that you do, and you watch enough overseas basketball that you just know that overseas game even better than you know the NBA game because you watch more of it, then you can't really say, well, overseas is like this or overseas is like that. Again, doesn't make any sense. Another reason why we can't say this is because with overseas basketball, you have several different levels of leagues. The NBA does not have levels. There's not a first division NBA and a second division NBA. Here you can insert jokes about a trash team in the league. And there's no first or second or third division when it comes to the G League either. They all are at the same level. So you could just say, I guess you could say the NBA is like Division 1 and G League is Division 2, kind of, but that's not really the way it's set up. But there's only one level. Whereas if you go to Spain, you got Division 1, 2, 3. You might have like 10 divisions in Spain of teams, and you could see an American at Division 1. You could see an American playing Division 7 in Spain and getting paid to play basketball. If that's where they got to start out at, or that's where they want to play, whatever, that's what it is. So there are so many different levels. You can't just say, well, overseas is like this, because the difference between what's going on in the first division in Spain and what's going on in the 7th division in Spain for an American player are 2 completely different experiences that we can't put in the same box. All that being said, now that I've given you that context, let me lay some things out for answering this question. And all this is to answer this question: how good are overseas basketball players? The first thing I want everyone to understand is, just because a player is playing overseas does not necessarily, all right, I'm driving, somebody called me, but anyway, what I was saying is just because a player is playing overseas does not necessarily mean that that player is not good enough to play basketball in the NBA. As I explained in an earlier video where I talked about how overseas basketball works, sometimes a player will go play in overseas because they don't want to take the risk of trying to get that NBA job where they got to go to a training camp and they might get the job, they might not. They might get a non-guaranteed contract that they can be released from, as opposed to an overseas opportunity where you got to take that deal early in the summer, way before NBA training camps, and the best contracts overseas get taken up in July, August, whereas in the NBA, if you make a roster, you don't get on that team until when it's training camp, late September, early October, and then the contract's not even guaranteed until January. So players got to consider life outside of just basketball. They got to think about their money, their family, their kids, their wives, all of those things outside of just basketball. So there are some players who are playing overseas who are plenty good enough to play in the NBA, who just decided to take the overseas opportunity because of the way that things are set up business-wise. If you didn't hear my explanation in that video, go watch that video. It's called How Overseas Basketball Works. I also did an article on it a while back. You can get it at dreallday.com/athletes. The other thing that I will say, there are NBA players who are kind of end of the rotation guys. I mean, so if there's 12 guys on the team, people's number 9 through 12 at the end of the bench in the NBA, they could easily be swapped out with somebody who's playing overseas right now in a first division in some league, and you would not notice the difference in skill level or performance level from those different players, for many of them. Not all of them, but many of them. Another thing is, I also must say, just because a player is playing overseas does not necessarily mean that they are good enough to play in the NBA. Not everybody who's overseas is good enough to play in the NBA. And some of you players who are watching this video, you may have come to the, either we'll call it realization, because I know you believe in your game and you're confident and all that, and you have to be, or you just accept it like, all right, I probably am not going to get a real opportunity of playing in the NBA. You might not ever get a training camp invite or even a chance to turn one down, even if you wanted one. And overseas is going to be your opportunity. That's going to be your opportunity to go and do your thing on a basketball court. And of course, if you're watching this video, you understand there's nothing wrong with that. Now, I have to give all this context because I want to make sure for the people who really want to understand how good overseas basketball players are, that you need to understand all these things. Because again, I could have give you a 2-minute video and just put in this little box, overseas players are like this and this, but it would be bullshit, because I wouldn't have given you all these details that have to be factored in when you're talking about overseas basketball. Because it's not just overseas. Here's another thing. Overseas basketball is not just one big league where it's like the NBA. The NBA is one league with 30 teams. The G League's another 30 teams. Overseas, there are hundreds of teams. It might be thousands of teams in overseas basketball. That doesn't mean there are thousands of jobs for American players. I told you like 4,000 players, Americans playing overseas. Not every roster spot overseas is available for American players. I'm gonna do a separate video just on that topic now that I'm talking about it. But anyway, to generally answer this question, how good are overseas basketball players? So I'm gonna give you some bullet points. Number one, just because you're playing overseas does not mean they couldn't play in the NBA. Number two, just because you're overseas don't mean you can play in the NBA. Number three, there are so many different levels to this shit of overseas basketball that you can't put it in a box of how good an overseas player is, because there are several levels of players. And there are players who might play in several different levels, divisions, in different countries over the course of their career. You might have a player who starts out playing in Division 5, but then somehow works their way all the way up to Division 1 at some point in their career. And they might skip levels on the way there. So how good is that player? Are they a Division 5 player or a Division 1 player? Maybe they got better, maybe they got worse, maybe they knew somebody, maybe they had the right agent, maybe it was the right place and the right time, who knows? Maybe they got released after 3 games. We don't know. And you don't always have these details because, again, with overseas basketball, us fans or spectators or anybody who's not actually playing, you don't have access to information about overseas basketball the way you do NBA basketball. You simply don't have it, even if you have access to a person who knows a lot, a person like myself or some blogger or some scout or whoever likes to share information. The information is not as readily available, so we can't look at it and judge it and quantify it the same way we do NBA basketball, because we don't see everything that's happening. And there are a lot of overseas leagues, games are happening and nobody ever sees the video. And sometimes it might not even be a video. these days I think a lot of people are doing video. I won't say everybody, but again, we don't have access to the information the same way. So even though this video may frustrate some people who are listening to it, because they're like, well, Dre, you gave all this explanation, but you didn't tell us exactly how good overseas basketball players are. Well, because how good somebody is, quote unquote, can't be quantified. You can't quantify how good a person is. It's just like you saying, all right, if we say LeBron James is a 100, how good is all these other 1,000 people? Like, what sense does that make? How can you even do that? You can't. Not in a logical way that makes any reasonable, practical sense. You can't do it. You could do it in a way if you're just trying to be, you're just trying to give a quick answer or just say something just because you want to say something, or you're trying to be funny or sarcastic, but you can't do it in any way that really actually makes sense. So for the people who might be frustrated because you watch this 10-minute video and I didn't just give you a quick, straight answer like some people like to say, well, understand this is the way that it is. This is how it is. In life, some things need context. Everything can't fit into a box. Everything is not that simple to be understood and explained. And if you are too simple-minded to understand that, then you listen to the wrong person. And on top of that, you probably aren't the type of player who's going to be playing anywhere, any professional basketball anywhere in the world anyway. So I don't even know what to say. Kanye shrug. All right, but I'm going to do y'all know I got more videos coming on this topic, so I ain't even got to say that. But if anybody has any feedback, some logical feedback that makes sense on this topic, go ahead and post it in the comments. Don't say nothing stupid in the comment section. And if anybody has a question, a follow-up question, or want to ask me about any topic regarding overseas basketball that I have not covered on video, make sure you look at the videos that I've already posted before you say so, because I might have already covered it. Then go ahead and leave the comment in the comment section. I ain't got to tell YouTubers to leave a comment. Y'all do that anyway. Work on your game. Dre all day. balloverseas.com. Make sure you get those free resources down below in the video description.